When you think of China, you probably picture those giant cities full of lights, bullet trains cutting across the country at 350 kilometers per hour, and cutting-edge technology everywhere. But what if I told you there's another China, completely different from the one you see on the internet? In the countryside, far from the major centers, life is different. Villages where people have never seen a foreigner, places where arranged marriages still exist, communal bathrooms, and even regions where the government has such a great control that it seems like something out of a dystopian movie, in areas where people don't even speak Chinese as we know it. Today, I'm going to show you the dark side of the Chinese countryside, a forgotten, different side, a side that no one shows you, and what really happens when you leave the modern cities and enter the villages and hamlets of the country. You will discover how life in China is at its roots and how different it can be from the big cities. And now, enjoy the video. They have never seen a black person, and it shocks them. Imagine you're walking peacefully down a little street in the Chinese countryside, and suddenly, an old lady grabs your arm, stares at you as if she's seen an alien, and starts calling the neighbors to look at you too. Sounds bizarre, right? Like a movie scene. But it can happen. But hold on, many people confuse this with some kind of prejudice, but you will understand why there's nothing malicious about it. If you are black, or even just a foreigner, depending on where you go in China, this happens more often than you might imagine. Children become paralyzed. Adults ask for photos as if you were a global celebrity. And it's not out of malice, it's out of pure astonishment. This happens because many of these people have simply never seen someone with features so different from theirs, especially in the interior of China, where contact with foreigners is almost non-existent. For decades, especially during the more closed-off eras of the country, like the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese people were practically isolated from the outside world. Information was very limited, tourism was minimal, and the idea of racial diversity was far from reaching these villages. To give you an idea, until the 2000s, most TV shows, books, and educational materials in China only featured Han Chinese, the largest ethnic group in the country. In other words, the image that many people from rural areas have of what is normal is basically a repetition of themselves. So when they see a black person, or even a blonde person with blue eyes, it's not a racial issue. It's not prejudice in the sense of hate. It's more of a curiosity mixed with a bit of ignorance. It's like, wow, does this really exist? Can I touch your hair for real? There are videos of various foreigners showing this in practice, and there's a specific channel that I really like called Black in China. And in some videos, when he goes to less touristy places in China, this is exactly what happens. There are also reports of people being followed by a group of teenagers for 10 blocks just to take a selfie. Others say they were invited to dinner at someone's house just because they were different, and the locals wanted to see them up close. Of course, this can be uncomfortable at times, but it's also a chance to realize how unequal the world is in terms of access to information and familiarity with the concept of diversity. And this cultural shock doesn't stop there. What might surprise you is that in many regions, the locals don't speak Chinese. Yes, there are many Chinese people in these regions who don't speak Chinese as most Chinese people do. And I'll tell you this story. You prepared for your trip to China, learned a few phrases in Mandarin, and think you're going to do great and be able to travel the whole country. So get ready for this plot twist. There are entire regions where Mandarin simply doesn't work. China is a gigantic country. There are more than 1.4 billion people spread across an incredible diversity of regions, cultures, and languages. Yes, in the plural. Because Mandarin, despite being the country's official language, which is what we know as Chinese, is not everyone's mother tongue. In places like Guangdong, Cantonese is still the most used language. In Fujian, you find Minnan. In Tibet, Tibetan. And in Xinjiang, Uyghur. This is without mentioning the hundreds of local dialects that change from village to village. Sometimes even the Chinese themselves don't understand each other. There are cities where the older generations never learned Mandarin in school, so they only communicate in the local language. And even for those who speak Mandarin, The accent can be so strong that you need live subtitles. Now
Agora
imagine
imagina
this
isso do
from a
ponto de
foreigner's
vista de um
perspective.
estrangeiro.
You study
Você
Mandarin
estuda
for
meses de
months,
mandarim,
take courses,
faz curso,
memorize
decora
phrases,
frases,
arrive there,
chega lá,
flash
abre
a
um
big
sorrisão
smile,
e
and say
manda
ni
ni
hao,
hao,
and the
e a
person
pessoa te
responds in a
responde num
dialect
dialeto
that
que
sounds like
parece um
Klingon,
Klingon, que é
which
uma
is an
língua
alien
alienígena de
language
Star
from
Trek,
Star
aí,
Trek
pra
for
quem não
those who don't
sabe.
know.
É
It's
desesperador
both
e hilário
desperate
ao
and
mesmo
hilarious
tempo.
at the same
Mas é
time.
aqui que tem uma
But here's
parte
the cool
legal.
part. You
Você
start to
começa a
realize that
perceber que a
China
China
isn't
não é
just
uma
one
coisa só.
thing. It's
É
like
como se
multiple
fossem vários
countries
países
within
dentro
one.
de um só.
That
Muito além
stereotype
daquele
of the
estereótipo
standard
de
Chinese
chinês
person we
padrão
see in
que a
Rob
gente vê
Wood
nos filmes
movies
de Hollywood.
still
E
holds.
isso daqui vai
And
muito
this
além
goes
do
far
idioma.
beyond language. While in cities like Shanghai and Beijing, couples meet through Chinese Tinder, arrange dates in modern cafes, talk about careers and travel. In other parts of China, there are still people getting married without really knowing their partner. Yes, arranged marriages still exist in some rural regions of China. They are often organized by families, and the couple practically has no say in the decision. Sounds like something from an old movie, right? But it still happens, even today. In places like Henan and Anhui, there are several reports showing that in isolated villages, poor families still arrange marriages as a way to ensure financial stability. In Nganzu and Ningxia, which are regions with a strong Muslim tradition, the choice of partner is often still made by the parents, with a focus on preserving the community. In regions like Yunnan and Guizhou, among some ethnic minorities, arranged marriages are still part of the tradition and persist. But why does this happen? There are several factors: economic inequality, cultural tradition, low education levels in rural areas, social pressure to marry early, and even a lack of available women in certain areas due to the population imbalance caused by the one-child policy. We even talked about this in some past videos. And this is yet another clear example of how China lives in parallel realities. There are places with modern marriages, open relationships, women's rights growing, even though China doesn't much like female independence, and there are villages where an 18-year-old girl marries a farmer because their parents arranged it and pressured her to do so. Another thing that shows this reality is the stark difference between major urban centers and some more remote villages. In big cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing, China looks like the future. There are bullet trains cutting across the country at 350 kilometers per hour, facial recognition payments, robot deliveries, 5G internet on every corner, and smart buildings that seem to have come out of a science fiction movie. And this gives the impression that all of China is like this, which is not true. If you go deeper into the countryside and visit different places, it feels like you've gone back about 30 years in time, and I don't mean that in a pejorative or bad way. It's just truly fascinating. There are places that are extremely beautiful, like the villages of Yunnan, and others that are much more basic, like Guizhou. In some of these places, you still find communal bathrooms, houses made of clay or raw brick, with very good heating, dirt roads without proper lighting, children going to school by bicycle or walking for hours, and no internet access at home. Guizhou, for example, is a mountainous and rural province that is one of the least developed in the country. Many villages there still live as they did decades ago, and there's a strong presence of minorities like the Miao and Dong. Guizhou also has villages that are a bit better, like Yunnan, which is a very diverse village with dozens of different ethnic groups, with mountain villages where traditional costumes are still worn. It's a place I would say is a bit more touristy, very beautiful, really stunning, but some regions there still have little infrastructure. Even in regions like Henan and Anhui, which are cradles of Chinese civilization, you still find very simple villages. There are still many stories of arranged marriages and children left with grandparents. You also have regions like Gansu and Ningxia, which are poor areas with Muslim villages, generally of the Hui people. There you also have clay houses and some villages with very poor sanitation. It's like leaving Dubai and stepping straight into an episode from 1995, all within the same country. This happens because China's development was extremely fast, but not uniform. Cities grew with a focus on technology and international trade, while rural areas were left behind, often lacking basic infrastructure investment. The government has done many things to improve this over the years. You can't say the Chinese government doesn't work, but it's quite challenging to improve these living conditions due to issues of location, infrastructure, and various barriers these places have. And you know what's more curious? For those who live there, this is normal. Life in the countryside is more peaceful, less rushed, and more communal. But it's also tougher. Many families live with the bare minimum. Access to quality healthcare, education, and urban mobility is still a privilege of big cities. Well, one point I also wanted to bring up, which is quite common in reports from foreigners who go to the interior, is that many people believe that if you're from outside, then you're very rich, even if you're traveling with an old backpack and counting coins to eat instant noodles. It's that idea that the West is always wealthy, as many people in the countryside grew up hearing that foreigners come from developed and wealthy countries. They automatically put you in that package, which of course can lead to some quite funny and other slightly abusive situations. At the market, the price can magically double just because you're not a local. Tuk-tuk or taxi drivers might charge 5 or 10 times more and try to rip you off. On other occasions, the treatment is the opposite. Many people offer you things for free, invite you to dinner, as if they were in front of a VIP. This too stems from a historical reality. For a long time, rural China had little contact with tourists, and the few who did appear were indeed people with money, diplomats, or entrepreneurs. So even today, many people have this image that foreigner equals rich. And of course, this doesn't mean everyone will want to take advantage of you. Often it's pure admiration, or even a certain respect. But it also shows how huge the economic differences still are, and how the perception of foreigners can be idealized. Well, these are the sides of the interior of China that are little talked about, a place full of surprises and many differences, where tradition and modernity, isolation and technology, simplicity and surveillance coexist side by side. On one hand, villages where arranged marriages, communal bathrooms, and people who have never seen a foreigner in their lives still exist. On the other, futuristic cities like those with bullet trains, 5G internet, and glass skyscrapers. All of this within the same country. That's why understanding China is so complex. Because there is not just one China, there are several Chinas, parallel realities that completely change how people live, think, and relate to the world. But comment below, could you live in such a place that is so different from others? Share it with someone who is also curious about China, and subscribe so you don't miss the next content.